All right. So thank you very much, Kanchan, for joining this session. And we have many
Sure.
people
And
already.
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, welcome. So we have already lots of people joined. So how are you today?
I am good. Thank you for asking. How are you all? How are you, Dharam? And how's everyone?
I think all going good. So welcome to all of you. And with no further delays, I'd like to introduce Kanchan. Kanchan is working in a very high technology environment, automation, auto vehicle. That's what they call cruise, and it's kind of a dream of everyone to sit in a car where you don't have to drive, and the car is driving to you anywhere where you want to go. So recently, I saw actually one video is going viral. Where it's showing that one person's, the two cars coming and they're going together, and then you sit there and log in your address and you just sit there, relax, watch movie or whatever.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yes. Thank you, Dharam.
Yeah, so that's what you get to know when you were living in San Francisco.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
We
Kanchan,
will definitely be expanding it. Go for it, Dharam. Yes.
yeah. So Kanchan actually attended a class that was organized by Cruise as a company based in San Francisco. And out of the group, Kanchan gone all the way and I think within 2 months, he completed his PgMP. And this is a kind of a, I know normally people do in 2 to 3 months, and you did in 2 months, less than 2 months, which is great. So,
Thank you.
and yeah, we'd love to know more about that. But not now. We'll talk about that a little later. And I'd like to formally welcome you to this session and to all of the
Thank you.
participants who have been coming to this session again and again, learning from various leaders in the industry. And and today happened to be one of my close friend, and he's working in the new technology. He's working in the PMO of this fast-growing company. So, I thought it's a good idea to invite him to get his learning, and let him share his knowledge and learning. So, Kanchan would like to say a few words about you.
Yeah, very brief, Dharam. I don't know. I don't think I should take up too much time talking about myself, and I don't like to do it anyway, as you know. So I'm an engineer by training, like probably many of you are. Um, I went, I've done all sorts of roles in engineering, starting as an individual contributor to directors of technology teams, all the way to being a CTO and a VP of engineering at a startup. Somewhere in there, I took a different turn, started my own company, and was introduced to what you would call technical program management today. We didn't
Mhm.
call it at that at the time, but that was sort of my introduction, looking back on it, to this whole idea of becoming a program manager. And then I worked for this company called Juniper for many years, 10 years, and that's where I really went from being a TPM to building a PMO, managing PMO, converting or up leveling a PMO to what's called engineering, business operations, and strategy. And then sort of I became this professional program manager. I then went on to another company, Google. You folks may have heard of it, where we did solve different kinds of scaling problems in the data center. And then I got an opportunity to join my current employer, Cruise, where they were building this whole idea of autonomous vehicles that move around by themselves. It's a pretty common idea, a concept. Waymo is one of our competitors, as are others. But I essentially have been carrying over my program management chops and skills into managing large, complex programs, which, as you can imagine, an AV is. So that's who I am. I'm an engineer by training, became a TPM. I did get an MBA in between, and in between, I picked up some of these PMI, PMP credentials, which is pretty interesting. And the latest with Dharam's help, the PgMP. That's who I am. I hope that helps.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Thank you for introducing and showing, yeah, you have great
Sure.
credentials and you've done MBA, you've done PhD, and PMP, SCSM, and the most important is PGMP. Uh, so it was great working with you in the class, and
Yeah.
it was a good journey, and you completed your application. The most important part of the PGMP journey is the application. Once the application is done and approved, now, of course, the exam is important, but whole journey start with the application, and you did it within the time frame, and you got it.
Yep. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. All right. So thank you all for joining this session. As I said, this is all privilege to be part of your journey or learning process. So this was started a few years ago, where I thought it's a good idea to collect all the knowledges and expertise into one bucket. So people like you can benefit, and your future generation can also benefit from these discussions. I don't know how long these video will last on YouTube, but whatever it is.
Yeah.
So hopefully the knowledge bank and knowledge coming from the expert like Kanchan will inspire you or motivate you to do something extraordinary and take your life journey to something which you never thought beyond your life, dreams actually.
Yep.
So Kanchan, I do have set of questions,
Sure. Please.
and I will be asking those questions. Please, and also
Yep.
I'm expecting questions from the audience. I already have one question, and
Okay. I'll
we
do
will
my best to
discuss
answer.
and yeah. So, I will, if audience question, I will also help you with that or whatever it is, but we'll work out the question. If we cannot answer, we can always come back to that.
Sure.
All right. And for the audience, I'm going to share a PDU code later in the session, and you will be able to claim one PDU. So, yeah, we will be talking about that as well. And I also shared one link where if you wanted to learn about PgMP process, I have created one video, around 1.5 hour video, very lots of information. And you definitely like, if you are working toward PgMP, you definitely want to see that. And if you want to do PfMP, I have another video. You can look at my YouTube channel. So, Kanchan, I have few questions, and these are related to your
Yes.
profession
Sure.
and the work you've done in current and in the past life. So, how can PMO support, given that you are coming from PMO background, how can PMO support organizations to achieve business agility and respond to changes in the business environment swiftly, especially companies like, Cruise, where things are changing very, very fast?
I think my perspective on this is obviously informed by my experience, and that can be different from others. So I want to say at the outset, this is just my perspective. Someone else may have better ideas or a better perspective. The way I see it, PMO has to be sort of leading or driving or at least asking the question, depending on and I've always worked in engineering organizations, so I'm kind of biased towards engineering orgs. This may not necessarily be true for consumer goods or other kinds of industries, but speaking for engineering and high tech in particular, there's always I would call a level of tension, a constructive tension between engineering looking at PMO processes as something that weighs them down or is an overhead, versus actually facilitating work, right? Because when there's a crisis, there's always called for what's the process for doing this because we're really messing it up, and it's in particular very complex. And people get used to that, right? PMO developed a process, solves a certain problem, people like it, it solves their problem today. They're like, oh, this is great. Let's just keep doing this. Except you need to go to a different development process. It happened to me in one of my past roles. We were a very waterfall centric company. We decided to go agile, and there were market forces that were making us do so. Our nearest, the startup competition was all agile. They could get our features far faster than we could. Granted, we had to fight a different market base, a telco base, for example. That takes a little bit more time for good reason because we can't afford to just sort of bring things down and upgrade them. There's reliability is a big piece when it's AT&T and Verizon. But that's not necessarily true if you're going to more tolerant market environments where they don't mind a little bit of a downtime as long as they get rapid feature upgrades, which calls for agile. So how do you introduce agile in a very waterfall culture? And more importantly, probably in a mixed way. Some teams stay waterfall, some teams do a bit of both, and some teams do pure agile. And really, there isn't one answer, right? PMO does need to be out there with ideas and does need to be out there with plans for what I call proof of concept. What I've seen work really well in engineering cultures, it's proving to people, giving them data that this new idea that you have is not just a nice set of slides, but actually works. And you have proved it with some real small projects. It doesn't have to be a huge one, but small POCs, relatively low impact, low sort of, if something goes wrong, you don't really hurt much. Maybe you start off with an internal POC, then you go with POCs that impact a small set of customers, and really expand the footprint to show that not only are you applying this set of ideas to these programs or projects of increasing complexity, but at every stage you're reflecting learnings back from these projects and proof of concepts to make it even better and better. I have seen iterative, when PMO drives iterative processes like that, the level of acceptance and the level of adoption really steps up, as opposed to a big bang approach, which is, okay, here's a great idea. VPs all sign off, and the SVP of something says, on this date, we're going to go live. You can try that, and you may even get an SVP to approve it. I think it's unlikely in the current environment, but you can even get them to approve it. There's only one problem. The engineering teams will be slow to adopt. They will have many, many reasons why they weren't part of the buy-in process. They couldn't provide feedback much earlier in the process, and you will ultimately fail, or your org will adopt it so slowly, it's effectively a failure. So, my sort of coming back to Dharam's question, my recommendation always is come up with a set of principles with some specific wins that you plan to have, and then try it out as a POC on small projects and programs. And at every step, as you succeed and provide feedback, you gain adherence, you gain people who will evangelize for you. And your big win is when you're not there talking about how cool this idea is, but some other organization or groups of organization is saying, hey, look at this cool thing we are trying and we came up with, and you should maybe try it out. That's when you have a real win, right? You gotta be able to, in the kind of organizations that I work in, to present the idea, go through the whole iterative learning period, and then let others take credit for the work you did in the beginning, because the end results are adoption and success of the business. I don't know, Dharam, did that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, so that's good. And I got that. So I have a question. He's saying, were you working for the PMO office, or was you trying to convince the PMO office to switch from waterfall to agile?
No, I was part of the PMO office, right? And there was a general awareness everywhere within the org that we were just quote unquote slower than our competition because they were agile.
Mm,
And the counter to that was, well, the competition that you're looking at is focuses on the enterprise market versus the service provider market. The service provider market is more tolerant of delays in features because reliability is number one. The enterprise market, not so much, right? They are really more feature driven rather than, and so our the company I work for covered both markets. The startups were sometimes an enterprise market, but that's where the growth was, right? So PMO had this unique thing where the cash cow was the service provider market, but the growth. So currently we make a ton of money, and most of our money comes from the service provider market, market A, call it. But the growth is in market B. So you can't provide justification to support market B on today's cash flows, but that's where the growth is. So how do you make this work, right? And we were also very clear that we didn't really want two or three, four, five different processes. Some companies have done that. You can do that, but you need a tremendous amount of overhead, both from PMOs and engineering orgs and engineering operations orgs, to maintain different sets of processes and then to sort of bring them all together. So as a PMO, it was our job to say, how can we support the enterprise side of our market with much more agility and yet preserve what we really hold dear and we are really known for, quality and integrity and solid reliability on the service provider side of the market, and yet be true to both, right? So when you're talking about programs with priority backlogs or feature list requests, how do you compare them? So PMO was actually tasked to come up with a process that would try and marry these two to the extent we could. And don't get me wrong, what we came up with ultimately was essentially a set of core principles across both. Whether you're agile or waterfall, there's a few things we need. Like we needed, I know this is anathema to pure agilists, right? A committed backlog. There's no such thing, right? Backlogs keep changing. But we did have to have boundaries around the backlog just because our product management team needed to deliver a set of features. The understanding was in the agile framework, the delivery timeline of these backlogs could change. That wasn't necessarily true for the service provider side. So there were a set of core principles we came up with, and then some I would call adaptations to pure agile or really an agile waterfall environment versus waterfall. It is also complicated if your company doesn't just build software, it builds silicon, it builds hardware, and it builds software, which is what we did. And silicon and hardware classically don't lend themselves well to classic agile. So you have to do some adaptations there as well. Anyway, long answer again. I was part of the PMO, and we were supposed to drive this process through the entire engineering organization.
Perfect. Great. And follow up with that is, so your experience came in handy as you came from engineering background and was able to see the benefit from the migration. Very interesting.
That's absolutely true. An engineering background helps a lot with credibility when you're talking to engineering organizations because you have some sense of their pain. Whereas if you bring in a very top-down, process-centric approach, which is very heavily driven by directive approaches from VPs and SVPs, it doesn't go over very well in high-tech engineering orgs, in my experience.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure, sure.
All right. Good. Good. So I have a next question for you. According to the Wall Street Journal, most leading multinational organization directors, CEO, and senior executive, the number one concern is transformation risk. What are the steps taken to overcome such risk by the organization? Transformation risk.
That's a, again, very context sensitive question, right? Where you are. I have seen transformations where we say, okay, the team that we have on board we need that team to stay focused on the business as it is because we can't just walk away from the business. But we also know we need to transform. So let's just bring in this whole set of people external to the company, bring them in, um, and let them learn what we do today. Let them tell us what we should do right, and then we empower them to launch the transformation. And that can work as long as these people come in. They take the time to understand the company's culture, what's going on, and then sort of make the transition work with the organization. In practice, that's very hard to do. Most times I've seen sort of consulting type organizations come in, they have done transformations in XYZ place. They are confident they can apply the template to this place. And every place is different. No matter which big name company you might be, and I've worked with all of them, right? At the very top, the McKinseys and so on and so forth, all of them. In practice, everybody has time pressure, everybody has deadline. A lot of these companies have people deputed to work with you for a certain time period, then they rotate in and out. And what happens is a lot of the institutional knowledge they're supposed to pick up doesn't happen. And 3 months go by, 4 months go by, 5 months go by. They come back to you with a set of recommendations, and we are like, well, we already knew that. We kind of told you that. You're just telling me back what I already told you, except in fancy slides. So what did I get out of this? Okay, you have recommendations. Well, recommendations are easy. Who's actually going to drive them in the org, right? I mean, I can recommend that you should go to the moon, but actually going to the moon takes a bunch of work, and who's going to actually drive that? And that's where they fail, right? Because these recommendations get presented at some very senior level meeting. They get filed in a nice little electronic drawer somewhere, and then we look around for people to implement it. Everyone is so busy, no one has time, no one believes in it. Everyone thinks it's a bunch of external hooey anyway that the board wanted. Nobody does it, and it fails. And sometimes it's almost like we bring these consulting companies in, and then we do a little bit here and there as a fig leaf, right? Real transformation really comes from within, in my opinion, right? You really have to find people within your org who are respected, who have the cred, who actually believe in this new or whatever thing you need to get to. You relieve them of their day-to-day responsibilities with strong subject matter experts and other people, but you support them with a tactical staff, right? If you need project program management support, you don't necessarily have to, you can take some internal people because they have the context, but you can have external people and they work with the internal people as a team to go support it. But it needs to be driven by visually and in every way with people who are deeply aware of the culture, the context, have the relationships, and have operational clout. They are empowered by the leadership of the company to make the decisions and the changes they are trying to make or going to make with real consequences. And the way I sort of talk about it, many of you have heard of OKRs, right? Objectives and key results, or balanced scorecard, all different ways by which companies commit to goals. these really need to get engineered into engineering or company OKRs or balanced scorecards and have a very clear executive alignment to somebody who's respected and known in the org with the right kind of muscle to carry forward the execution. People figure out very quickly when somebody who's just a figurehead starts to drive change. They look around in their OKRs and it's reflected nowhere, so they understand, hey, even if I don't deliver this, it's not even documented. What's documented is what I'm going to be measured against at the end of the year. Don't worry about this other stuff. Yeah, of course, say I'll try, I'll get to it, do what you can, but it's just lip service. You're not serious about it. So I think real transformation happens, or is evidence of real transformation is when a company really empowers somebody respected, strong, integrated, really gives them the budget and the resourcing manpower, both internal and external, and actually spends the time, maybe a quarter, just developing the OKRs that are then integrated at the highest level, at the CEO level. If you're a public company, this is something you report out on at some level. And then internally, you have what we call QBRs, quarterly operations reviews or business reviews, where these OKRs are reviewed and measured. I don't know if that helps. My view, you get what you measure, right? If you don't measure, or if you don't make people accountable to measure something, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, definitely you need to have metrics, and metrics should be measured. People should be, of course, the target and measurement should be realistic and agreed upon with other, the stakeholders. Yeah. So I have a question. Did you work? Yeah. So somebody has. Yeah. So very impressive. So did you work with the functional department or engineering department to set metrics to be used? Are the benefits sustainable? Is this being adopted throughout the organization?
I guess the question is, did I work with a functional org? Yeah. I have worked with specific engineering orgs, cross-functional orgs, the whole scale, right? With a single very large engineering org of, let's say, 300-400 people. I have worked with cross-functional engineering orgs addressing different businesses. An example, core routing, edge routing, switching, data center, all of these, right, are different engineering groups and creating OKRs or balanced scorecards, as we used to call them, recently OKRs, across the group. Yeah. And that's an interesting exercise. I'm trying to guess why the question's being asked. It may be because of the cross-functional challenges inherent in this. Is not
Mhm.
one group's priority, may not be another group's priority. And that is always an interesting challenge because at a certain level, you work with what are called the operations leads of each engineering org to come up with a proposed set of OKRs. As soon as you do that, the easy ones are, just specific to one group. But the hard ones are when you see conflict, right, across the group. Like, for example, if I need to get something done on the hardware side, I need software support, let's say. But software isn't thinking that it's their OKR, but it's got to be their OKR. Otherwise, you will fail. So this cross-functional alignment is really, really important. And you do what you can with what I call tactical level people, but at some point, you have to get, and which you do at any point, at any level, as the VPs or the leaders of these orgs to get together and say, okay, they don't talk about the stuff that they're obviously going to do. Their discussion should be focused on the cross-functional pieces where there's conflict or where there's contradiction, saying, hey, so and so you are saying it's not an OKR for you, or your team is saying, for me, this is important. Why not? Or what do we need to do to make this happen, right? And sometimes the answer will come by, well, I don't have the funding or I don't have the resources. I'm happy to do this for you, but I need X funding or Y funding. And we can resolve it here, but we as a VP team, let's escalate this to our SVP of the overall organization to make the funding calls that we need to make. And on it goes, right? So this process isn't like a 1-2 day process, right? Typically you will start for next year's OKRs, you will start maybe Octoberish, maybe even Septemberish, depending on how big the org is and how long it takes. And then by mid, before you break early December, you would ideally have your OKRs aligned all the way up to the SVP level, which is then, if you're a public company, gets presented to the board because your OKRs ought to be supporting the company's overall goals, right? And so I need to step back and kind of describe this workflow. What it should always start with is what are the company's goals at the corporate level for the next year? From there, you get very high level OKRs at the SVP level. Then those OKRs need to be married to the VP's OKRs. Now, keep in mind, each org can have additional OKRs beyond what they're doing to support the company OKRs, right? For example, code coverage may not be an OKR, it's probably not an OKR at the company level, but it's probably an OKR at an engineering level. So that's okay to have, but you also need to find a way to support the paths to the company OKR and how you're going to support each other. This process takes a lot of program management, and this is where when I built what's now called the Engineering Business Operations Office, this was the role. We used to call them operational program managers, as different from project program management in the classic sense. Their job was to drive organizational alignment on the operations or the OKRs or what we are going to do next year. The skill sets are very common, pretty much the same thing, but it's not about, oh, I built this product and ship it. It's more about, I'm running the org or helping run the org, and I got to keep it running because the follow on is once you build the OKR, if you're a public company, or even if you're not, every quarter you have a report out on the OKR. How are we doing? Where the gap? Where are the risks? Where are the issues? Where are the gaps? And then make sure the right people at the right levels are talking about this, and in the reviews, whether they're the quarterly operating reviews or the business reviews or whatever. So hopefully that gives you some sense of how, and if I understand the question right, how you would go about working OKRs and objectives cross-functionally.
Exactly, exactly. Good, good. Very, very impressive. I'm getting good feedback on the question pad. Thank you.
Good, good, good.
All right. So I will be asking the third question. I'm going to ask third question from you. What are the challenges faced when scaling agile in large organizations?
What I have seen, and frankly, I have to be honest. I mean, again, my perspective is informed by the level of the issues that I have seen. Right. The biggest issue that I have seen in organizations, there's two things. One is the application of agile in large, cross-functional, complex engineering orgs that are serving different products or different flavors of products for different markets, right? How can you be consistent? Is agile in one org the same as other? That's always a huge challenge, right? In most places I've seen, they define what are called guidelines for good agile, and pure agilists always have an issue with this. But modern high-tech engineering orgs don't take well to prescriptive guidelines, even if it's considered pure agile, right? So people can get their SCM certification or whatever, but when you're in the real world and if you're working with large, complex engineering orgs who have very strong opinions about things and how they should be done and why, based on their business, you have to be ready to adapt. So you have to be okay with, okay, here's some things that we share across the org. Like, for example, we have a backlog review. That's pretty simple. We have a retrospective. Okay, that's pretty simple. But things like, well, what does the backlog look like, and how do we prioritize? How frequently do we have our Scrum meetings? And who plays the role of a Scrum Master? All of that you have to be okay with adapting to an organization's needs and realities. They simply may not, as Scrum Masters, may not want to resource or budget it. They may just assign an engineering manager as a Scrum Master. They may not want to review their backlog every single time. They think that their backlog is pretty well defined and they just go by order, 1 to 5, 6 to 10. They don't necessarily, reiterate on their backlog. Some teams may even skip Scrum meetings every once in a while, right? As long as they have the sprint, it's well defined. It ends there. Some teams set aside sprints for scoping. Some teams don't. They think scoping is a whole separate activity. They will do it. Then once they get into execution, they have sprints. Some teams believe no, scoping is actually a sprint, and we will set aside a sprint for that. So I think that's one thing I've seen, that while there's a core set of principles you can all align to, and every org is a little different that way, you have to be okay and flexible enough to be adaptable to every sub-org's needs and dependencies. And the other piece is what I said is the backlog. I think this is always a challenge is when you as an organization are delivering a product with a certain set of features, but the work is divided among 20 different engineering orgs or 10 different engineering orgs, and everybody manages the backlog a little bit differently, how can you have visibility and, more importantly, predictability around what's actually going to launch with the product? I will not say I've solved that problem. I haven't seen it being solved. I think it's iterative. You have to have really strong product and program management teams keeping track of everything that's going on. So at every step, you are providing a good picture to your executive leadership as to what can be delivered or what is going to be delivered. And if there's a major delta that a VP of product management or a VP of delivery or somebody has a concern with, they can raise it right away. But you have to be prepared for that. It takes a lot of active cross-functional management to make sure that what you're delivering to the customer is in line with what you promised. And internally within the engineering orgs, you are exercising the right level of discipline by being agile and yet being practical and responsive to the needs and the requirements of the org. I don't know if that made any sense, but tried.
Yeah, no, that's very well said because especially when the large organization moving from waterfall to agile, its concept look great. When they say, "Hey, other XYZ companies benefiting from agile, let's adopt it, let's get started next month or 5 months from now, let's get have all the projects makes all the projects into agile." So they get excited, but there are a lot of things you have to do to prepare, not just setting up the Kanban board and giving making team. The mindset has to change. And now people have to actively thinking or looking the backlog and regrooming the backlog and talking to the product owner. Product owner has to be involved. So a lot of things are involved in this.
Yep.
Yeah. So experience, some of the experience, some of large bank, one of the large banks say, hey, the agile teams are doing great, but executives are still expecting the report in a traditional format, or they are expecting the meetings the way it used to be. So the team has been converted into agile. The mindset has changed, but the organization is still thinking from the older style thinking.
Yep. Yep.
All right, let me see the questions. Is agile could be applied to quality programs?
I am not sure what is meant by quality programs here. I can tell you that the way agile works is quality, at least in the context of software. It's inbuilt, right? I mean, you have certain criteria for delivering code at the end of a sprint, um, whether it's bugs, code coverage, whatever the case may be. So it's actually integrated in it. Quality isn't a separate activity, which is why it makes me think that if there is a program focused on quality improvements or maybe sustainability, why not? I think agile is a to me, look at the first principles, right? What is agile? Agile is essentially a way to implement a set of requirements in a rapid way. So rapid iteration, rapid feedback. Every 1 week, 2 week, you have sprints and implement it. So if a quality program has a set of quality goals that you can break down into very actionable tasks that you need to get done, ergo, you have a backlog. And ergo, if you have a backlog, you can then work within your teams and your stakeholders to say, okay, here's the sprints I'm going to set up with this much of the backlog to deliver at this stage, and you go off and do it. Whether it's a process doc, for example, I know legal teams that do agile, right? They do agile because they have certain things to deliver on pure legal documentation, and they just create a backlog of what they need to do. Then they go execute sprints, right? So, in theory, why not? As long as you're able to break down your work in a set of tasks, create a backlog, you can just fire up a Jira board and go do it.
George, did you get your answer? I think it was a good explanation, but I'd like to hear from George. You can.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, great. So it makes sense to yeah, George as well. Perfect. I have another question. Which project management information system are you using to get clear view on the project and the program? Are you using particular PMIS, something like plan views or something?
I come from the world, I think a lot of you will sympathize with this. I come from the world of Microsoft Project originally, and I've used Microsoft Project at the enterprise level, right? Not just at the desktop. When you have, I was a consultant delivering California's or helping deliver California's real-time energy management grid, the power management grid, right? Or the software for it. We had this huge Microsoft project that spanned many vendors and many departments. I later on also used a tool called Clarity, which many of you might be familiar with. It's a resource planning tool. It's different from Smartsheet, or rather, it's different from Microsoft Project in the sense that it it can do project dependency, but really what I found real use for Clarity is in resource planning and budgeting and resource allocation and providing visibility to management. Currently, most high-tech companies, though, that I know of or I've been part of, use a combination of Google Sheets and Smartsheet, right? Smartsheet to do your classic Microsoft project type work, which is lay out the tasks, lay out the dependencies, lay out the resource allocation, delivery timelines, and voila, you have an end-to-end plan. You identify critical path, you go manage critical path, the risks to critical path, and you manage your schedule primarily and your resource allocations. In addition, you will have something like a Google Sheets doc where you will manage resources, this many programs, this many resources. Now that has its limitations, as you know, because if you're doing scenario analysis, like, hey, what if I, accelerate this project versus this other project? It's hard to do that in Google because it's really a spreadsheet, right? You have to go manually move things around and do it. That's when you need something like a Clarity, or I'm not familiar with Plan B or some of the other tools I've ever mentioned. But most high tech companies don't mind that. They're like, look, I mean, for the level of granularity that we have, we're going to use Google Sheets for resource planning. Even huge companies, that massive high tech companies. But Smartsheet's been really popular in terms of managing program schedules and dependencies and critical path in the recent years that I've seen.
Yeah, good, good. Thank you. And it's not only Smartsheet, but there are a few other products coming up in the market. So actually,
Yeah.
one product I myself is connected with that we call VXVCC, and that is where we are bringing the whole organization in one place. And whether it's your HR, your resource management, and project program portfolio management, your supply chain management, and then, sales management, everything have to be one place. So, and even the Agile project or Waterfall project, anything can be managed here. So yeah, so Kanchan, if you like to see, or maybe anybody else like to know more about that product, I'd love to talk about it. So I think, yeah, it's one of the product I'm going to, and people will talk more about it very, very soon. Anyway, so the next question I have is, what dynamic capabilities and leadership skills are required by project program portfolio leaders when handling large scale projects?
You need to have a very thick skin. Well, I don't know if that's a dynamic capability, but you start with a thick skin. Okay, you always got to remember one thing, or at least in my opinion, you are going to be called by some people as a CEO of your program, as a leader of your program. And yes, that's great and that's true, and you should do that. But be prepared to step back and let others take credit and take leadership in order to move the program forward. Put your ego. One of the big things, one of the hardest things about becoming a program project manager as opposed to an engineering leader is you have to be okay with being in the background. You have to be okay with others getting credit for the awesome work they did, which they did. But program project management sometimes, not always, being an afterthought. Yeah, so and so did a great job bringing everybody together. And that is sounds really easy in a single sentence. And and others know it's not at all. It's probably the hardest part of the job. When you have 10, 11 different teams together, keeping them aligned, you have to be okay with that, right? You have to be able to to set your ego aside and let others sort of take credit and lead as long as you can deliver. At the end of the day, you want to say you delivered what you said you would. Um, have excellent negotiation skills. Be really good at reading your audience, whether it's an executive, whether it's a subject matter expert, whether it's an engineer who's brilliant but very difficult to work with or tends to dominate a conversation in any meeting you go to. Because it's not just that engineer you're dealing with, it's the people at the rest of the people at the meeting. We're going to be pretty pissed at you that you didn't control the meeting. You let this other person talk over everyone else and nobody got heard. That is a fair concern, and you got to be able to manage that primarily by building relationships. You got to be a great relationship builder, even with the most difficult to work with people. I have a situations where VPs will come to me and say, "Well, that VP and I, we just don't connect, and he or she, always takes it personally. Can you figure it out?" Okay, so the VPs just couldn't figure it out amongst themselves, and here are you, low man or low woman on the totem pole to go figure it out. But you know what? You actually can, because if you are seen as somebody who doesn't take sides, is a little bit of a Switzerland, just wants to do the right thing by the company and the product and the business, and a fair assessor of what needs to be done and stays with the facts, right? Doesn't get wrapped up in feelings or it's my document versus your document or, my group versus your group, but really stays focused on the facts, the actions, and moves everybody forward. Um, you will be welcome. Um, the other VPs or VPs will see you as sort of non-threatening, right? You're not threatening their role or their position or their group. You're just trying to get the work done. And it doesn't hurt if you are also generally nice and personable, right? So being a program manager, you need to have relationship skills. You need to be seen as the Switzerland. You're not taking sides. You need to be able to set your ego aside. And you need to do all of that and being driven to execute. And this is kind of contrarian because you have to get stuff done at the end of the day. How can it be all of those things and be likable and bring people along and make them work together and yet be an execution person getting crap done, right? Getting, and forgive my French, getting shit done at the end of the day. But that's the job. You got to be that way, right? So, and not everybody succeeds. It's very stressful sometimes. But you got to have a mix of all those skills. Some of those are built with you have lots of credit on your own anyway. You've achieved a lot, and you're okay letting a few things go as long as things come together. You have a natural gift for bringing people together. You're good at building relationships, and at the end of the day, you're very, very no kidding focused on getting stuff done, not by pissing people off or running over them, but by bringing them together. Focused on getting the work done by bringing people together. That's sort of the capstone of it. I said a lot of things that are kind of soft and hard to quantify. I totally get that, but it is what you need to have to succeed as a program project manager. But I'm not sure. I think I strayed from the question. Did I answer the question?
Yes, you did talk about, the skills you need to have as a project program and portfolio manager to manage, large scale project. And of course, collaboration and negotiation and the stakeholder engagement, all skills are, required. So I can see lots of feedback coming. All well said. I love your candidateness, Kanchan. And great answer. So, yep. So
Thank you.
you did very well. Thank you. All right.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And after learning from PgMP, did you get anything extra, the skills, especially the stakeholder engagement skills, which were useful or which are useful in your day-to-day PMO or program and role? It's just
That's a good question. I'll be honest with you, right? I've been around. I've been around, right? I've lots of gray hair to prove that I have been. But the biggest reason that where I thought the PGMP, everybody's different, right? For me, the PGMP was a great way to sort of reemphasize and even from an academic theoretic viewpoint to get some affirmation of some of the things that we have been doing. Sometimes you do things out of practice and you've learned on the job, but don't necessarily have the theoretical background or have affirmation that that's the right thing to do. For me, the biggest thing that PGMP did was that, right? And including the stakeholder piece, right? You can't be a program manager as long as I've been, which is what I'm trying to think back 15 years maybe, right? Now going 15 years of program management work, direct hands-on, being a program manager, building teams without learning, at least intuitively, all the stakeholder management skills that you need to have. But the PGMP was a great way to sort of put it all together and really test myself with the test questions. How deeply did I understand it? I had trouble. I forget what's her name, the lady, Dharam. She passed away, right? Her test questions, and
yeah,
trying to
Dr. Ginger
remember.
Levine.
Yes. And this is, one of the things I really ask, really, and I've had to learn this humility. You must have a healthy dose of humility in yourself to succeed. When I tried to answer Dr. Levin's questions the first time I tried it, it was a disaster, right? I was like, oh my God. I mean, according to this, I really know next to nothing or close to nothing. I don't know how I even have a job, right? It turns out that he would ask questions that to me were somewhat abstract, and you really had to read sort of in between the lines and get to the real sense of it. So I'm pleased to say that I don't even remember. I think Dharam was telling me 40%. I think I was getting in that neighborhood when I finally went into the PGMP test, and I said, okay, this is sort of like my PhD thesis defense, where the way it went when there's a stage where you go from just doing coursework to research. It's being called becoming a candidate. At my candidate exam, it was not a written exam; it was a verbal exam. There were seven professors, each experts obviously in their own discipline, sitting and quizzing me, and here I am, a totally like dimwit grad student, answering questions from seven expert professors in their field. You know how that works, right? The professors know that they can have you on the ground whenever they want to. They just want to see where you break, right? And that was really the question, right? I kind of figured it out that you went round and round and round, and after a couple hours, you broke. And they said, okay, fair enough. Yeah, you broke, but everybody breaks. And the question is, are you good enough to be a PhD candidate? And the answer is yes, you're a candidate. Okay, so I looked at the PgMP, Dr. Levin's questions as that, right? I will never, I mean, there was no way in hell I was going to get much far further past where I was, but wherever I was good enough for the test. So, that level, that dose of humility was important for me. Yes, I've been a practicing PGM for a long time, but I still have a lot to learn, especially in some of these industries that I've never worked in, right? So um, it's not that I learned something brand new, but I there was affirmation, confirmation of many of the things I've done, and also a reminder with a good dose of humility what I didn't know, what I had yet to learn. So hope that helps. By the in the other 20 years, I hope to get to maybe 50% or something.
Great, great. And thank you for the answer. And yeah, so Ginger's questions are not straightforward answers, and many people get fed up after a couple of trial or a couple of questions. I have seen people throw the book away and they say, Dharam, I'm never going to touch that book. The results are actually different. When people say, okay, you know what, I got something unexpected, so what I have to do from here? Versus if you throw the book away, you're never going to learn from that. So while book has one of the toughest question, very confusing question, and you correctly said you have to think beyond your boundaries and you have to read between the words, between the lines, all kind of things. But by going through this process of working with these kind of questions, you actually make yourself more ready for the exam because you now challenged and you're going to go back to the books and hey, I have to read more. So I like to see my students are over prepared rather than under prepared. So you took the challenge and you got the results. So along with you, now I have 360 PGMPs, around 11%. So I'm very happy that people have trusted me and gone through the journey and got the results. And thank you for your trust as well.
Sure, sure thing.
Just for the audience, I have just shared on the chat the PDU codes, codes identifier, and the PDU claim code. So please take a note of that. And people watching this video, you please send me an email or message through LinkedIn or WhatsApp or by email. I will share the PDU code. So once you have watched us this learning from this great talk, and you let me know, Dharam, I watched this program webinar with Kanchan. Please share the PD code. But please have a look to the chat. People are on the call at the moment, and take a note of the code before we finish the program. We still have time, but please take a note. And if you have any difficulty in getting the code, let me know. All right, I am not done yet. Kanchan, I still have two more questions for you.
Go for it. Go for it.
All right, so why corporate strategy fails even though organization invest enough time and money?
Because I've seen this happen, right? I've seen it both ways. I've seen it succeed and I've seen it not succeed. And strategy, what is the exact phrase? I think I've forgotten it. What is it? Execution eats strategy for breakfast or something like that? It's so true, right? You can strategize till the cows come home. But if you don't have an execution plan, which is resourced and bought in, and as I said before, reflected in the company's priorities, whether they're OKRs or scorecards or any method you choose, for your quarterly and your yearly goals, it doesn't mean anything at all. It doesn't, right? So, an early lesson I learned for a company, whether a company was serious about its strategy, how does it show up? Especially if I'm not part of the company, it's a public company, but I'm a shareholder, stock in the company. How does it show up in what they report out every quarter? Do they talk about it? Does the CEO talk about it? Does the CFO talk about it? Does anybody ask them about it? And what kind of answers do you get back? So execution is everything, right? So strategy is great, and strategy gets a lot of press and a lot of, you know, attention and glamour. But the stuff that really makes a difference to strategy working or not working is the unglamorous stuff in execution. It's the day to day, the week to week, the month to month, making sure it's resourced, making sure it's prioritized, making sure it's being tracked, and most importantly, escalating when things aren't getting done, right? Some places escalation is not a done thing. I say escalation is a good thing as long as you do it intelligently and thoughtfully, right? You don't just escalate to, um, look good or really get back at somebody. Uh, Ideally, what you should be doing when it comes to a key execution priority for a strategy is you and your counterpart across functional team agree. We can't make this decision ourselves. We know what the right way forward is, but that decision isn't ours. It's someone else's to make. So let's escalate together as a team. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes that doesn't happen. It's not possible. But you should be very careful when you escalate in those situations because you're likely burning bridges in relationships. But in my experience, that's typically rare. Typically, reasonable people, rational people agree. Yeah, we probably need to do this, but sort of fair, we can't get to it, and we need help, help, right? So back to your question, the biggest difference, I think the only difference is you can build the world's best strategy. That's what consultants are paid to do. But if the company that it's for and intended for don't execute on it, don't have the will to execute on it, don't have the resources or a combination thereof, that strategy is not going to make it.
Perfectly, perfectly. Very well said. Yeah, you can have the greatest strategy, but if you don't have the right people, right mindset, it will not happen. If you don't have good people to execute your strategy, then it's worthless. So, you know, invest time and money in the right strategy, right people, right technology, right? All right. I have the last question here. How to unlearn old and learn new behaviors? Overcoming resistance to encourage employees' morale, energy, and performance. You got it?
Yeah, I did. I'm kind of thinking about that. I think there's two things. One from the person side and one from the organization side. One is you have to be open. Well, you have to be open to new ideas. It's a little bit of a personal thing, right? And it's kind of informed by your life experiences, where you are, cultural, etc. But you got to be able to be at least be able to listen and be receptive to new ideas, even if they're completely opposed, diametrically opposed. You don't agree with it, or you ultimately not going to do it, but you still have to listen to it. And by the way, when I say this, I know it's much easier to say than doing it. Every single day, things come up that I really don't like to hear about. I don't want to hear about. I'm not interested in. Just don't care. But I have to actually mentally go into myself and coach myself. No, no, I know you don't like it. I know you think you have seen this before and it hasn't happened, but you got to listen. You got to keep an open mind. You got to try. Sometimes I have to make an active effort to do that, right? So, yeah, here I am preaching to you, keep an open mind. I'm also going to be the first one to tell you it ain't easy. It ain't easy. And frankly, the older it gets and the more experience you get, it gets harder because you've seen it all and done it all, right? That's what your mind tells you, but you haven't, as Dr. Levine's questions prove to me, big time, right? So, and the second thing, though, in the organization you work in, there has to be a culture of psychological safety. There has to be a culture of psychological safety. In other words, look, if you're used to doing things in a certain way and you need to go learn things, there has to be a recognition of it by the organization that you're in and allow you time and space to do that. If people are constantly coming at you with doing things and they want you to learn new things, but they won't make the time and space for you, that's not a good situation, right? That's setting yourself for failure. So that probably requires you to have a conversation with your boss, your boss's boss, or whoever, whatever your channels are. Hey, listen, I acknowledge I need to learn it. I want to learn it. I just don't have the time in the day. Can you help me prioritize, right? It's not a one-way traffic, it's two-way. Can you work with me to prioritize things in a way so I can make room, so I can learn this? So I can, when I learn this, I'll be more valuable to the org and I can really be more of a value add as opposed to just tactically executing day to day. So it takes two to tango, like in most things, right? You got to be open, and that's harder said than done. It's easier said than done, as I said. And you got to be working in an organization that will allow you the space and the psychological safety to learn new things and reward you for
Perfect. Great stuff. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and knowledge. Um, Any other question you have, guys, from the audience? So please feel free to put that. And anything, any message you have, Kanchan, for people who going to who thinking of doing PGMP, or any guidance you have for them, what you did. I like to warn people, like when you listen to somebody like Kanchan who has gone through a journey, you listen to that and you apply your own wisdom.
Mm.
Everybody's journey is different. Everybody's experience or life, and how they were going through is all different. But yes, you listen to all the big names, the big people, but you apply your own wisdom before you accept or reject anything. So, Kanchan, any thoughts around that?
I'll just share a couple from my own personal experience, right? Because that's all I can speak for, right? I will say this, right? Be very clear on your motivation. So why are you doing this? And second, are you really, really, no kidding, able to spare the time and effort that you need to do it, right? Have no illusions about that, right? So if your motivations are clear to you, typically you will make the time and space. But if your motivations aren't clear or they change, making time and space becomes harder. But then again, when I say that, I also realize this. Your motivations may have been clear in January, and you absolutely had plans to make time and space for March, but stuff happened. Life happened, right, in February and March, and things went sideways. Be absolutely open and honest with yourself, and come back and say, I can't do this now. When I have the, when I'm able to come back to this, I will review my motivations and do it. But don't just sort of drag it on, right? That's at least my view. I will share a couple of tidbits from my personal journey. I wanted to do it as sort of, I kind of always looked at it, never really had the opportunity, and frankly didn't have the motivation internally to go do it. But then my company was kind enough to offer it up, and I saw it come through my email, and I'm like, oh, okay, so they're going to give me time and space. It's kind of up to me. So I have thought about it for a while. Why don't I do it? So I signed up for it. And once I signed up for it, I was like, I have no excuse, right? Company's giving me time and space. They are not just that, they're funding me and so on and so forth. I have support. If I don't do this, I never will. So I got to find the time, and Dharam knows, right? I mean, I'd be multitasking in his meetings. I think one day I was cooking lunch while he was talking, and um, you know, answering Slack calls in the middle of meetings, in and out. But my North Star was, yeah, okay, I'm spotty attendance and all that, but my North Star was, I want to make sure I review the material. I want to make sure I'm preparing so that I will keep moving towards the goal no matter when, right? No matter what happens. And that helped me stay centered, right? So I wasn't the best student from Dharam's perspective in terms of attending class and doing homework and paying attention. Far from that, right? I was a C student at best. Um, but I did my homework. I did my homework and I stuck with it, and I went back to him to get advice, and it worked out. And if I can do it, honestly, I'm pretty mediocre. I was C, maybe even a C minus, B plus student in this class. I'm sure most of you can, because I'm sure you all do way better than I do. So
Yeah,
that's it, man.
this is good way of putting this is humbling. Okay, so as you said, yeah, I know you were not the best student at the time, and but you are the only student who gone all the way through the journey. It's not about how much attention you pay, but how much you gain out of the discussion and stay with towards your north star and vision and get it done. So yes, you were dropping out of the meeting or the discussion, going have to go. Dharam, I have to cook food for my kids and this and that. But in the end, I was surprised that you are the one who took all the way, gone all the way, and complete the journey in the record time.
Thank
Fantastic,
you. Thank you.
fantastic. So now look, guys, just like Kanchan and many of the people gone through this, and of course, it's not for everyone. You need to have a vision, you need to have determination, you need to have time, money, and and a peace of mind. While you're busy, as long as you are connected with your vision, this is possible. As Kanchan mentioned, you have to stay with look at your vision and keep pushing yourself. If you don't have vision, just because everybody else doing or your organization asking, I'm very sure you will give up very soon. It has to be personal motivation, personal drive. If you get opportunity like Kanchan got and is connected with your drive, take the advantage of that. So I am here to help you out, whenever and wherever you can. And it's a real difficult exam, but if you're committed, if you have right mindset, right books, and of course, right mentor, things are easy. All right.
Yep.
Okay, so we got very good feedback. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Kanchan. It was really great
Thank you.
discussion, and you are very open and you gave the good feedback and good experience. Many people liked it. Normally, I don't get that many feedback on my question pad, but I got so many people saying very good, very well, very well addressed. You are a very good way of managing your stakeholder, engaging with stakeholders. So you do what you do. You speak about that, and that's what people liked it.
Thank you very
So
much. Thank you all. Very nice. Really appreciate this opportunity and humbling too, right? That I can speak to such a broad group of very, very smart, capable folks. Thank you, Dharam, for the opportunity.
great stuff, great stuff. Thank you. And anybody who want to or willing to connect with me, of course, I'm not sure Kanchan is open for connecting, and I'm sure Kanchan is can be connected with through LinkedIn and he can
Yeah,
provide you
yeah,
feedback
no
and
problem.
guidance in the direction or anything you like to. And of course, you can reach out to me for anything I can help you.
Sounds great.
So
Thank you all.
thank you, and wish you very, very happy Christmas time and holiday time and happy New Year. This is possibly my last webinar in this year. And next year, I will join with more and more professionals around the world. So stay focused and keep watching the LinkedIn announcements. So thank you for your support so far in this year. And thank you, Kanchan, for your, taking time out of your busy schedule to give us so much insight. And I'm sure people have loved it and they will keep loving your message. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Have a great Christmas and New Year's, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Take care.